So it's time to start. I would like to welcome all of you for coming to this webinar, to participate in this webinar. My name is Paulino Silva, and I will be your host for today's webinar. Just before starting, I would like to have just a very quick sound and image test. So I would like you to say to me to have your feedback about the sound, if it is okay, if you are listening to well, and if the video is also okay. Everything is okay. You can use the. Okay, thank you, Isabel. So I probably most of you know already that there is a available space to chat. Normally it's on the right side of the screen, so you can use it to make some comments during the presentation or to make some questions, and also to make questions at the end of the presentation. So just to avoid this kind of sound feedback and some things that can interrupt the presentation, I would like to suggest you to turn your sound off, and it's possible always to make a comment in the chat box. Okay. So I will start. I hope you are seeing the first slide about the webinar for qualitative research methods. Yes, are you seeing it? Yes. Yes. Okay. So let's start. I will put my my camera off as well, just to be more easier for you to listen to. First of all, I would like to thank to the organizations involved in this webinar. MAERA, which is the knowledge arena of MAERA Association, and a very special thanks to Space Network and eApril that have been very helpful during this webinar series. Thank you. So, as I said, my name is Paulino Silva, and we will be together during this webinar. A brief presentation of myself is in this slide, as you can see. My motto is looking for avenues in management, accounting, and education. As I don't want to be alone from this side of the screen, I also want to introduce you Lucy, that will be with us during this webinar. This is so now it's time for you. I would like to you to make a very brief introduction in the chat box. You can use the chat box to do it. Mainly, you can say your name and where are you coming from. Okay, so you can use now your chat box to make a presentation of yourselves. With the first one to do the presentation, Anabela from Portugal. Everyone is writing at this moment to present themselves, so we just Isabel as well, researcher. Catarina from Portugal as well. So we have mainly people from Portugal. So the others can do it during the presentation, the introduction. So we have Daria from Croatia, is not only from Portugal. Thank you, Daria. So the others can do it, by the way, during the presentation, the introduction. So about the agenda of today, that will cover mainly three themes. After talk about some initial topics on qualitative research, I will present the main types of qualitative methods. And before the conclusion, I will talk about case studies, as they are very used in qualitative research and can incorporate all types of qualitative methods. So for the discussion, let's start by asking a question. What is qualitative research? And another question is, how different is qualitative research from quantitative research? What do you think? It's something that we can discuss before. What is for you qualitative research? Do you have any idea about it? You can write it down in your space, please. What do you think is qualitative research? Do you think it's the same as quantitative research? It's very different from quantitative research. What do you think? In 2 or 3 words, what can you say about qualitative research? Okay, we have here a definition from a novella. Is the gathering of qualitative data in order to get a deeper knowledge about the respondents. Okay, more definitions. Quantitative involves measuring. Isabel is saying that as well. Okay. People that already know about qualitative and quantitative research methods, so it's important to have this feedback from you. Let me share with you this table. This table was the answers from participants of one of my courses about qualitative research methods. So as you can see, the definition of qualitative research is somehow far from what is expected in the research context. As you can see, what is it, what is not. However, you can find some interesting points, such as the possibility of answer the questions how and why. On the left side of the table, you can see at the bottom this answer. So let's see what literature says about qualitative research. So the definition is not crystal clear, as we can see from these authors. According to Jennifer Mason, there is no consensus on these questions, as qualitative research cannot be considered a unified set of techniques or philosophies, and has developed from a wide range of intellectual and disciplinary traditions. So, nevertheless, qualitative research is commonly associated with certain schools that are known for developing an interpretivist sociological tradition. And what about different types of qualitative researchers? There is anthropologists, and anthropologists have been using qualitative research in the form of ethnography. Psychologists, more associated with quantitative research methods, have developed research based on content analysis and psychoanalysis. So, educators, for instance, have conventionally used case study methods. Historians have developed an approach to the use of qualitative methods in the writing of oral and life histories. And there is also media and cultural researchers that rely heavily on qualitative ways of knowing, and health scholars also support strongly their research on qualitative research. So, as a kind of summarized definition of qualitative research, it is a type of scientific research that consists of an investigation that seeks answers to a question, especially if it is a why or how question, uses a predefined set of procedures to answer it, collects evidence, produces findings that were not determined by in advance, and produces findings that are applicable behind the immediate boundaries of the study. Jennifer Mason argues that the distinction between quantitative and qualitative methods is not entirely clear-cut, and all researchers should think very carefully about how and why they might combine any methods, whether qualitative, quantitative, or both. So, in terms of research taxonomy, we can see that qualitative research is more associated to interpretive research, left side of the image, and quantitative research is more associated to the positivist research, which is on the right side of this image. So, just to clarify briefly both approaches, let's see how they work in a basic way. So, positivist research has mainly three phases. First, it is used a theoretical model to formulate hypotheses. Then, hypotheses are tested. And finally, results are generalized. On the other side, interpretive research has also mainly three phases. First, it is used fieldwork. The phenomena is studied in the natural environment. And finally, holistic theories are developed. Now, Lucy makes you some questions. You need to find a focus and know where you stand. Normally, it's not very difficult to find a broad topic or area for research. It's more challenging to design an effective project with a clear, relevant, and intellectually worthwhile focus to explore the topic. So you need to explain to others briefly, but specifically, what your research is about. You should be able to articulate that in the essence of your inquiry. So there are 5 essential topics. 1, the social reality, your ontological perspective. 2, knowledge and evidence, your epistemological position. 3, your broad research area. 4, your intellectual puzzle. And 5, your research questions. So first, what is the nature of the phenomena or entities or social reality that you wish to investigate? Second, what might represent knowledge or evidence of the entities or social reality that you wish to investigate? Third, what topic or broad substantive area is the research concerned with? 4, what is the intellectual puzzle? What do you wish to explain or explore? What type of puzzle is it? And finally, what are your research questions? About research questions, I would like to recommend you the first webinar of this series, addressed by my colleague Anabela Mesquita, that develop this topic very well. Now the big question, which methodology to use? First, we need to know what is a method. The selection of the most appropriate research methodology is dependent on the nature of the phenomenon being researched. There are 3 steps to reach methodology. First, ontology, that are the assumptions which the researcher holds regarding the nature of the phenomenon's reality. Second, epistemology, that will affect the way in which knowledge can be gained about that phenomenon. And finally, we reach methodology, that affects the process through which research can be conducted. So, what is a method? The word method comes from the Greek word methodos, which means the way to come to an end. In dictionary.com, we find a very similar definition: a procedure, technique, or way of doing something, especially in accordance with a definite plan. And what are research methods? Research methods are research techniques that allow specific analysis according to the methodology followed by research in which they are used. So there are 4 main types of qualitative research methods: interviews, observation, texts and documents, audio and video. So let's see. Of course, it's possible sometimes, and sometimes it's also very convenient to combine methods. Some examples are in management, for instance, interviews plus documents. In anthropology, participant observation plus interviews. And of course, one single study can combine the use of all 4 methods. And it's possible to use any method in quantitative research, but it's not very usual. So, interviews. Normally, we are talking about semi-structured or open interviews. Why? Because this is the only adequate way to have a deep response to research questions. They are similar to normal conversations. They can be conducted by a researcher to an interviewee or group of people. Interviews can be done in person, by phone, by internet, video conference. They can have a duration of a month or several years, and they can be in a small or large number. But we need to prepare the interview. The preparation of the interview is one of the most important steps when conducting interviews. So we need to think carefully about the set of questions to use. These questions can come up, of course, from previous interviews or from other methods used previously. And we need to think about the best way to approach interviewees in order to obtain their permission, by email, by telephone, etc. So we need also to think carefully about the best way to approach some sensitive topics in order to avoid interviewee retraction. So we need to prepare to manage adequately the interview in order to obtain responses to the questions previously prepared, control the recording if it is the case, etc. Now, this is an example of interviewees' details that can be an appendix of an article or of a thesis. So as you can see, there is a list of the interviewees with the length of the interview approximately, and the purpose of that, and how the media was collected. So observation. Normally observation is related with watching activities made by interviewees and other professionals, watch social actions, behaviors, relations, etc. Observation is very used to try to understand other cultures and can be combined with other research methods. Example, participation in meetings. Observe the reaction of interviewees during an interview. So this is a real example of the use of observation from one of my master's students. Direct observation allows us to understand how the activities, behaviors, relationships, social activities, and events held and or communicated by observed. The observation was carried out for long periods of time since the company and their case study worked by shifts, thus allowing the presence of the researcher. The reactions of respondents were collaborative. It was not observed negative behaviors. Observation notes were registered after leaving the company. As you can see, in this observation allowed the students to be aware of what really was going on in the factory and to validate some information collected through interviews. Another example, another type of research method is text and documents. This is a method used widely in qualitative research. There is a variety of documental sources such as legislation, newspapers, magazines, newsletters, textbooks, and other publications, mailing, either physical or electronic, projects, reports, diaries, memos, historical archives, commercials, contracts, websites, and so on. And these texts and documents can be part of a wider research strategy or be the only method used. An example is a study dating back to a distant past. In this case, we can only use texts and documents as the method. So in terms of documents registration, this is an example of documents registration that can be an appendix of an article or of a thesis. This is also an example. Another research method is audio and video, and rarely used in quantitative research, mainly because of the difficulty in quantifying data generated by this method. However, it is widely used in qualitative research. For example, recorded interviews are more reliable than researcher manual notes. It allows the review of the content as needed, and sometimes, but there is a problem, sometimes it's difficult to get permission for this type of method. So they are very relevant when we want to understand how individuals express themselves, either by conversation, through audio recording, or by body language through video recording. It may not be suitable in certain places. Example, manufacturing facilities with noise in their audio recording. It requires great availability of time. Example, the transcription of recorded interviews. However, there is some issues we need to take into account. Audio and video allows more reliable information, but can constrain the professionals, the interviewees. The researcher needs to gain the trust of the professional, which may not be easy. And there are situations when respondents refuse to recording interviews. It is common for respondents to explain further their positions, opinions after the recorded being turned off. Okay. And it's very important to method triangulation. Sometimes different methods are part of the same research strategy. It is very common to use several different methods, namely interviews, text and documents, observation, audio, all of them to enable triangulation of the data collected. Triangulation basically enables to test validity of data gathered use different research methods. Now Lucy is asking about case studies. So case studies. Robert Yin defines case study as an empirical inquiry that investigates a contemporary phenomenon in depth and within its real-life context, especially when the boundaries between phenomenon and context are not clearly evident. There are mainly 5 types of case studies. So let's start with descriptive case studies. So they seek to illustrate the descriptive case studies, they are used to describe systems, techniques, and procedures followed in practice. They were especially used in the 80s when the researchers sought to obtain exhaustive descriptions of what was done in companies. Currently, they are used, particularly by professional bodies to describe best practice adopted by the most successful companies. Illustrative case studies. They seek to illustrate practices, supposedly innovative practices, developed by companies described as excellent. The knowledge of these practices is very important to understand to what extent the theory and prescribed techniques are followed by companies. Experimental case studies. They are the result of techniques, procedures, and practices developed conceptually by researchers in order to be applied to companies and analyzed its impacts. So they are useful for studying problems in implementation and benefits of using one or more techniques. So they were widely used in the 1970s when there was the will to design sophisticated techniques, which they then would not be much used in practice. Exploratory case studies. So they allow to the researcher to explore the reasons for certain practices. With this type of study, hypotheses are obtained to test in the future studies, either through other case studies or through other methods of research. Usually, they represent a preliminary phase of the research. Explanatory case studies. They intend to study and explain the existence of certain practices. The emphasis here is in particular, not in generic, unlike the case of exploratory studies. The existing theory is used to explain the practices observed by the researcher. When the existing theory does not explain satisfactorily, it is necessary to modify the existing theory or develop new theories. For many researchers, only this type of case studies develop the full potential of research method based on case studies. But there is another question. Single case or multiple cases? So even there are people that criticize that single case is suitable when the critical case in testing a well-formulated theory. It is decisive to test a well-formulated theory. An extreme case or a unique case. This is an infrequent or unique situation. Also, in a representative or typical case, the context and characteristics of a day-to-day situation. A revelatory case, a phenomenon previously inaccessible, and a longitudinal case, studying the same single case at 2 or more different points in time. So, the case study process is a linear but iterative process. Let's start with plan. So at this stage, we need to identify research questions or other rationale for doing case study. So decide to use the case study method compared to other methods and understand its strengths and limitations. Design. We need to define the unit of analysis and the likely case to be studied. We need to develop theory, propositions, and issues underlying the anticipated study. And we need also to identify the case study design: single, multiple, holistic, embedded. And we also need to define procedures to maintain case study quality. So, prepare. We need to hone skills as a case study researcher. We need to train for a specific case study, develop case study protocol. We need to conduct a pilot case, gain approval for human subjects protection, and then collect. We need to follow case study protocol. You need to use multiple sources of evidence, create case study database, and maintain a chain of evidence. Analyze. We need to rely on theoretical propositions and other strategies. We need to consider any of 5 analytic techniques using quantitative or qualitative data, or both. We have also to explore rival explanations and display data apart from interpretations. And finally, share. We need to define audience. We need to compose textual and visual materials, display enough evidence for reader to reach on conclusions, and we need also to review and rewrite until done well. So we need to test the quality of methods. These are the 4 steps to do that, these ones. So the first one is construct validity. So we use multiple sources of evidence for the same variable in analysis. Second, we go to internal validity, seek to establish a causal relationship whereby certain conditions are believed to lead to other conditions. Third, external validity. We need to define the domain to which a study's findings can be generalized. And finally, fourth, reliability. Demonstrate that the operations of a study, such as the data collection procedures, can be repeated with the same results. So, in conclusion, qualitative research should be systematically and rigorously conducted. There is no excuses for doing different. Be accountable for its quality and its claims. Be flexible and contextual, strategically conducted. Involve critical self-scrutiny by the researcher or active reflexivity. Produce explanations or arguments, not presenting only mere descriptions, and produce explanations or arguments that can demonstrate some wider reasons. Not be seen as opposite to quantitative research. If you are interested in doing qualitative research, prepare yourself for a long journey, most of the time without knowing when it ends. But there is something I would like to share with you. These words are from someone that revolutionized science and our world, Albert Einstein. And he says, "Not everything that counts can be counted, and not everything that can be counted counts." Thank you very much for your attention. So you can see now some references I use for this webinar. And I would like also take the opportunity to share with you information about the next webinar. The next webinar will be about the publishing and review process, and in the 1st of July 2019, and at 3 p.m. GMT. And my colleague Anabela Mesquita will address the next webinar. So, thanks again for your attention. Now it's time for your questions.